2017 is the 8th straight record-breaking year for tourism, topping 9 million visitor arrivals to Hawaii. What is the economic impact on our island state? The environmental impact? Is there a capacity study that tells us how to manage this kind of success? And what do you think about the state collecting taxes on vacation rentals that are illegal in 3 of the 4 counties? Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Yanchi Denise. 2018 is predicted to be another banner year for tourism in Hawaii. As the top economic engine, tourism provides jobs and revenue for our islands. But along with those surging numbers comes a growing sentiment by locals that tourism is causing unprecedented negative impacts on our residential neighborhoods, the environment, and on our aging infrastructure. We used to celebrate the booming tourism industry, but that industry and the preferences of tourists have changed. Can we achieve some kind of balance? Joining the conversation is a representative from the Hawaii Tourism Authority, as well as perspectives from local government, an industry observer, and a futurist. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet us your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and on the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guest. Jennifer Chun is the Director of Tourism Research at the Hawaii Tourism Authority. She's been analyzing tourism data for more than 20 years. She joined HTA in 2014. Lavon Leong is a senior writer with Hawaii Business Magazine. She wrote the cover story for the magazine's January issue, which asks, how many tourists is too many tourists? Jim Dater is a professor and director of the Hawaii Research Center for Future Studies with the Department of Political Science at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. He is the former president of the World Future Studies Federation. And Mike White is a former state legislator who currently serves as the chair of the Maui County Council. He has a long professional history in the tourist industry and has been the general manager of the Ka'anapali Beach Hotel since 1985. Welcome, everyone. Jennifer, I want to start with you and those numbers. I know we don't have concrete data just yet, but we are looking at over 9 million for 2017. From HTA's perspective, when you look at those numbers, is that a good or a bad thing?
I think that from looking at these numbers, we are looking at visitor arrivals, but we're also looking at visitor spending. And so from our perspective, visitor spending is increasing at a faster rate than the visitor arrivals. And so we think that's a good thing. Because one of the things that is important to HTA is achieving the balance. We all live here. So as residents, we appreciate the things that make Hawaii Hawaii. You know, we want to preserve our culture, our natural resources, and that is an important part of what HTA does.
So we want fewer visitors spending more money.
I don't really know how we can achieve that right off because you know, we've been marketing the state for decades and you can't really turn it off because people have been planning their trips, some of them for a really long time. So we can't say all of a sudden, you people can't come or something like that. So,
right. Well,
so that's why knowing that more people want to come, we need to try and find the balance and make sure that people are respectful to our place and do things smartly.
Well, Lavon, let's talk about that balance because your article went in depth on that, this frustration that a lot of folks feel with this industry that really is a lifeline for our economy.
Sure. I think it's important to strike a balance because on the one hand, I mean, I do work for a business magazine and we are thinking all the time about what's healthy for Hawaii's economy, but we're also looking at the triple bottom line and trying to figure out, because we all live here, we're all residents as well as professionals. And I think it's a good thing to be able to say, well, what's the effect on the environment? What's the effect on social life? So that triple bottom line, that environment and the social, sort of the community aspect of it, and also the economy are things that we need to discuss together.
And when you talk to people, what are you hearing?
When I talk to people, this has been an interesting, this was an interesting cover story to write because you know, I often, tell people what I'm working on and they're very interested, but they were really passionate about this. They all had a story, because they all live here. And they all wanted to say, this is what it was like 10 years ago at Manoa Falls, and this is what it's like now. This is what it was like 5 years ago at my favorite cafe, and this is what it's like now. So everyone sees a change. I think everyone acknowledges that. There was even an HTA conference that really went into that in depth. So I think sort of all the stakeholders are kind of on board. It's just a question of what questions do we ask and where do we go from here.
Mike, I think you come at this from a really interesting perspective because on the one hand, you're the general manager for a hotel, so these numbers have to be great. But on the other hand, you're also working in government, and all these added visitors put a huge strain on our resources. How do we strike that balance between wanting to support our industry, but at the same time wanting to protect our roads, our beaches, our parks, et cetera?
Well, it's a big challenge. Fortunately, on Maui, we've got a lot more space than you have here on Oahu, and we don't have the same population, so it's a process for us of looking at the resources that we want to protect, but at the same time, we have to recognize that about 75% of the jobs on Maui are either directly or indirectly supported by the visitor industry. So the Maui County Council has made a very deliberate decision over the years to do a significant amount of support for social services, for elderly and youth transportation. And so we spend a significantly larger amount of our resources on those kinds of things to take care of our youth, to take care of the elderly, take care of those that have made unfortunate decisions in their midlife, so that we use the visitor dollars to give back to the community in ways that make them a healthier community, and hopefully a more welcoming community. And I think for Maui, it's worked well. Not to say that everyone's excited with the number of visitors we have, but as everyone has said, it's a matter of striking a balance. And I think we're doing a reasonable job. There's, having gone to the HTA conference and listened to the gal from Iceland, where they've done an incredible job of trying to balance all the various stakeholders' interests. I think we can all learn from that process, and so we're looking at possibly going down that road.
Putting some restrictions, some limits on all of these tourists. Well, as a futurist, I'm really interested, taking the long view. Is the worst yet to come?
Well, I have been listening to what's been said, obviously, with my futurist ears and eyes, because you are all exhibiting what is typical, that we think about the future in terms of what we think is happening now, or has recently been happening. And we've been in a period of spectacular growth in many ways, and we think that's going to continue. I can tell you I've been on earlier versions of this roundtable discussion on PBS where the economy was going that way, tourism was going that way, and it wasn't a question of, oh, it's so crowded I can't do anything, but where are the tourists? Inasmuch as we made a decision a long time ago to make tourism our main driver, especially as you were indicated on Maui, but it's true generally. And I'd go back, in fact, question your opening statement, because we have not, I don't think we welcomed tourism. I don't ever recall a period in time when I've been here when we said, yay, more tourists, great. We always reluctantly know that that's our main source of income, and we have to put up with them. And at every stage in our past, we've said, no more, we can't stand anymore. And yet, we have no alternative. And every time, as I said, the economy goes down, we want it to go up again. The question, from my point of view, that I might want to talk about a little later is the kind of growth that we've had recently going to continue, or is a different type of growth about to happen? We did, once upon a time, have a very small number of tourists with very large expenses. They're really rich people that came over on boats before there were airplanes. And there weren't many of them, but they brought lots of money. With airplanes, we had a major transformation into mass tourism, especially now given the pricing on airlines. So it really doesn't take much money to get here. And as other parts of the world open up, we see a deluge ahead. but that's not necessarily the case.
Well, Jennifer, I mean, that's a great segue to think about how HTA does its work and the kind of folks that it tries to target. You know, obviously, as you said earlier, we can't restrict who comes, but what are the strategies that the Tourism Authority uses in terms of trying to draw visitors that do have a higher daily spending?
So we are trying to diversify the markets that we're marketing to. So if you look back in time where all the visitors were either from the U.S., Canada, or Japan, you know, we are trying to look at these other markets that maybe are spending more per person per day or per trip. We're also directing at our marketing at some higher spending visitors and trying to attract them here because, you know, if we can increase the visitor spending, you know, and not increase the visitor arrivals at such a rapid rate, then that works out better for the state.
Let's look at some numbers that you brought with us tonight, and I'd love it if you would break these down for us. We want to look at 2010 and 2016 visitor annual comparisons up on the screen right now. Tell us what these charts are showing us.
Okay, so looking at the first chart, we're looking at the 2010 visitor arrivals of approximately 7 million visitors, and 2016 we ended at approximately 9 million visitors. So within that, you know, 7-year period, we increased 2 million visitors. During that time, the visitor spending went from $11 billion to almost $16 billion, so increasing $4.9 billion during that time. At the same time, state tax revenue generated increased by approximately $810 million.
So that all sounds great. Let's also look at the visitor arrivals, if we could, for the total visitor spending here. This is TOT collection. Am I on the right slide? And the jobs supported by that. When we look at those numbers, oh no, this is visitor spending. Sorry, I just want to make sure we're on the right slide here. When we look at that, tell us what we're seeing there.
Okay, so this slide shows the transient accommodation tax collection. So in 2010, with the 7 million visitors, we collected approximately $225 million in transient accommodation tax, which is only on lodging accommodations. And then in fiscal year 16, we collected almost 450 million. So the difference is 223 million for the transient accommodation taxes that we collected. So we also have on this slide job supported. So in 2010, we had 145,000 jobs supported, and that increased to 194,000 jobs supported. So when we talk about job supported, they're not necessarily directly in like a hotel, like with Mike, but the tourism industry touches so many parts of our economy. So this is direct, indirect, and induced job supported.
So I want to get your perspective on that. When you talk to the folks that are feeling so squeezed by all of that, on the flip side, this is such a lifeline for us.
Oh, absolutely. I think everyone, well, many people can agree that tourism gives us a lifeline. It's our main economy's driver right now. It also supports things like lots of air access, right? We also are tourists in other places, and I love the fact that, you know, there are so many flights to San Francisco a day. There are so many flights to, you know, just about anywhere in the world, and it's one of the things that enhances life here. There are lots of things that tourism is also an interesting industry to have because an economy has to have industries, right? So. Tourism supports a beautiful environment. It supports a unique culture. You know, all of those things work in concert with tourism to produce, in an ideal world, you know, you'd have not so many tourists, or you wouldn't have so much overcrowding that people's life starts feeling impinged upon. And at the same time, you would have all of these benefits. And I think that's the balance that we're trying to strike, right?
Absolutely. We want to look at some other numbers very briefly, and these are island by island. This year, of course, we've talked about this before on this show, that this is the first year in a long time where we've actually lost population as opposed to people coming to our islands. If you look at this first slide, this is visitor and resident growth on Oahu. We have, you know, a consistent growth in our resident population, and it looks like our average daily census, at least on Oahu, is pretty constant. Let's go to the next slide. And we'll look at Maui. Of course, Mike's going to have a unique perspective on this. If you look at this one, we see that resident population going up, but we also see, unlike Oahu, we see Maui having a lot more traffic as well. Let's go to the next one. Kauai is next. Kauai, you sort of see a similar trend there in the numbers with a lot more people, it looks like, moving to the Garden Isle. And then, of course, we go to the Big Island. And there we have it. And what's interesting about the Big Island is you actually see more people moving there, the resident population going up, with tourism staying pretty steady. Mike, you lived on Maui for a long time. Talk about the changes in population there.
Well, the change in population, I went back about 10 years, and we've gotten about, I believe, growth of about 20,000 people. Because we always hear, my gosh, the roads are all jammed with visitors. We very seldom hear that they're jammed with residents. And so I went back and looked at the growth in the visitor count, daily visitor count, versus the resident population. And over that 10-year period, 70% of the growth of the folks who are on Maui every day is in the resident population, and only 30% of it is in the visitor population. So once again, as we try to reach a balance, we need to do so with some facts and figures that kind of help us understand the impacts. And
can I ask you a question about that? Mike, when you say the residents and you talk about the increase, is that fertility? Is that because of increased births or increased people moving here to live here?
I don't have that figure, but I would guess that it's a bit of both.
Because my understanding is fertility is relatively low. And that if we didn't have people moving in to live, I'm not sure that figure would be the same. So in a way, from my point of view, they are just other kind of tourists, because often they're elderly people, on the one hand, that aren't going to contribute a lot, and there are very perhaps first-generation migrants that are struggling and are coming here, and so their contribution will be of a different kind. And so that in terms of impacting the roads and everything else, we see it more as what is our concern about tourists and not about local people having more babies.
Well, you also wonder how many of those 9 million folks who come for a visit end up coming to stay, right? That you have a return visitor again and again, and eventually those folks decide, like, hey,
exactly,
it's a pretty nice place to live. Jennifer, do we have any breakdown in terms of how many folks actually stay for good?
Actually, no, we don't have the number of people who have visited Hawaii and then decide to become residents. That might be another department. But one of the things that I, personally feel about some of the migration to the neighbor islands is that I think a lot of them might be people from Oahu that moved to the neighbor islands for a different way of life.
That are seeking what they had maybe on this island 10, 20 years ago. We want to involve the audience, of course. Momi writing in says, it's time to have an entrance fee attached to plane tickets to fund areas of infrastructure in need. Because tickets are easily tracked, it would be easy to keep accountability regarding where the funds are placed, how much is earned. I would imagine that this would not be popular with HTA.
I think we would probably have to try and find a mechanism to do that. So perhaps this person is envisioning like an additional tax? Mm-hmm. I mean, entrance fee is kind of an odd thing to say, but it's possible. I mean, but I wouldn't want to put further taxes on the industry. And also, I think we as residents would have to pay that tax too, every time we flow, away and back. So I'm not sure how practical that is.
Right. Well, Mike, you were talking about the woman from Iceland and the sort of restrictions that they have placed. Last year, made huge headlines that you now have to make a reservation to see the sunrise at Haleakala. Right. Is that something that we could consider in the future, having access fees for certain, hikes, beaches? I know that a lot of folks in Hawaii, especially local residents, would be opposed to that. But of course, Hanauma Bay, you have to pay if you want to go snorkeling there. You don't pay, obviously, for a resident. But there are ways to sort of control this. I
think it's something we're going to have to look at, just from a way of managing the resource. And quite honestly, one of the frustrations that I think many of us have is that the Department of Land and Natural Resource is sorely underfunded. And they don't have the the resources to police what's going on, either in our nearshore waters or in our forests and streams and so forth. So there's some of us on the neighbor islands that are spending a significant amount of money to protect our watersheds and do other things to protect our environment. And we would love to have the ability to deputize folks to work with DLNR. But I think there's the reality that the state is going to have to come up with ways of establishing ways to help fund the activities of DLNR and others, with the responsibility to protect our real valuable resources, both for us as residents and for our visitors to enjoy.
I think this is Zarli from Kona writing in, when is tourism an industry in economic balance with other industries in Hawaii? I mean, I wonder if you got a sense of that from the people you talked to, that there is a feeling that this is an industry that is out of balance.
I think it's an industry that's out of balance, not necessarily economically, although we can talk about that too, but socially. That I think there was a pervading feeling from the folks that I talked to that, especially on Oahu, I can't speak for the neighbor islands, that people were feeling it in their daily lives a little bit more. You know, you talked earlier about residents moving around and that Oahu was sort of flat population-wise, and I think that kind of plays into it. Maybe it suggests to me that Oahu kind of feels overcrowded, and that we all live here, so we experience the paradise tax, right? We're all paid a little bit less than we would be if we worked on the mainland in a big urban city, but we're choosing not to live in that big urban city. We're choosing to live here, and one of the paradise parts of the paradise tax, which we really want to keep, I think, is that we get to go to the beach, that we get to hike on the trail, that we get to get out in nature and visit these wonderful environments, that we have this wonderful, unique culture. And we want to keep that, I think, because otherwise all we'll be left with is the tax.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, David from Kaneohe writing in, at what point does the tourism industry become a threat to our island's environment and culture? Shouldn't we be diversifying our economy instead of relying on tourism? Jim, I think this is a good one for you.
Well, again, that's a story I've heard ever since I first came here in 1960. And especially every time the economy goes down, we talk about the need of diversifying. But again, you're exemplifying that when things are pretty good, you don't want to do something that will prevent that economy, for which we have no alternative, from succeeding. So yes, we need to do those things, and we have had endless conferences and discussions about it, but it's just too damn easy to rely upon tourism when it works. And it's tourism needs to be looked at in a historical as well as futuristic perspective. It's a very new industry, and it's dependent upon a whole bunch of things happening that had never happened before, which may or may not continue into the future, at least in the way we've had them before. And so we need to understand that it is fragile, and in fact, begin to look at some of the things that might impact on it, either in order to continue to make tourism be robust, or to recognize we got to stop talking about alternative ways of doing things and begin to actually do them. And among those, from my opinion, is self-sufficiency. Self-sufficiency in food, self-sufficiency in as many of the material things of life as possible. One of the possible futures makes Hawaii much more independent and self-reliant than it has been for about 200 years.
And how do we best choose that path?
Well, it's that, first of all, from my point of view as a bleeding heart liberal, it means we need to have a public discussion about what we want the future to be in light of the tsunamis of change coming towards that we sort of recognize but don't really take seriously because things are going so well at the present time. And then when things aren't going well, we're overwhelmed with all these other problems. And so we never can find a good time to seriously think about alternatives and to begin to move towards them.
Or isn't it that we're so overworked because we're all paying the paradise tax? We're working 10 jobs apiece and can barely pay the rent. And so when do we have time to talk about what we want the future to really look like? I want to get to those numbers that you brought in and some quotes from Levon's article to kind of push back and give a little perspective. We want to hear first from James Mack from the University of Hawaii, and he says, quote, although spending per visitor is up, tourism's economic benefits relative to its cost have gone down over the course of a generation. Statewide tourism receipts look to be reaching record highs, but adjustments for inflation finds that the industry actually brings in less than it did at its peak in 1989. Tourism has been shrinking as part of the Hawaii economy, measured in real dollars. People don't think about that, but it is a fact. And Paul Brubaker, founder of TZ Economics, says, it's not that we don't like 9 million people, it's that when there were 7 million, we made $18 billion off of them. And now that there are 9 million of them, we make $16 billion off of them, adjusting for inflation. Straight off the top, that's more pilikia for absolutely less money. How is that good math? So elaborate on that point, if you will.
Right. I think Paul was talking about the 7 million tourists in the 1980s, spending $18 billion adjusted for inflation. Right, and today I guess we've got 9 million, or we've just broken 9 million, right? And the $16 billion is coming in. So I think when you're doing a sort of cost-benefit analysis, you have to try and figure out what is the benefit, and what is it costing us, and those numbers they factor into that.
Is that because the barrier to entry is so much lower that it costs less and less to hop on a plane, and because we have so many more carriers that are coming in, when he was talking about the cruise ship visitor versus the airplane visitor and down the line, I mean, why is that? Why are those numbers the way they are?
I mean, that factors into it. I think the type of visitor that we have, the spending patterns for a first-time visitor versus a repeat visitor is different. Our core markets have a lot of repeat visitation, and that the kind of things that they spend their money on are different. But one of the things, and I absolutely don't disagree with the economists, in real dollars, the spending has been flat. But most people don't live their lives in real dollars. They live their lives in nominal dollars. You get your paycheck in nominal dollars. So tax revenues come in nominal dollars. HTA's budget is in nominal dollars. So when you look at those kinds of things, and one of the things about looking at the 80s is that DBED's inflation-adjusted numbers are indexed to 2009, I believe. And so, yes, the numbers before that are higher, and the numbers that we have now, when we adjusting for inflation, are going down. So it's about 14 million billion for inflation adjusted. So I think that is a little confusing. And while I completely don't dispute the inflation adjustment, most people don't operate in an inflation adjusted world. Sorry.
No, absolutely. That's why you're here. We want to also bring in the audience, and this is an interesting one from Roger on Lanai, who says he's a local resident that believes if we continue to build high-rises and homes for residents, there won't be all the pristine beaches and calm and relaxing natural areas for visitors to come and visit. Oahu's traffic is now like Chicago. Why would tourists want to come here? So as someone in government, but also in the hotel industry, how do we balance that? Because housing is such a need for us here in Hawaii. We talk about it all the time. It all goes back to housing. How do we balance that?
Was that caller from Lanai?
Yes.
Interesting place to have a comment coming from with respect to tall buildings. Housing is a very critical need. Because we've got to have housing to take care of the folks that work in the visitor industry and attendant industry. So there's really so many things that are at cross purposes, because we want the place to be as pristine as it can be. So what we have done on Maui is we've established urban designations, and that's the only place where we're going to allow significant development. And it's in an effort to make sure that we're preserving those places that we want to preserve. We've also spent a fair amount of money buying up properties as we can to keep them in undevelopable state. So it's a balance, and it's trying to decide where the dollars that we do get from the visitor industry and other industries, where do we best spend those to protect the environment, protect our oceans especially, and to, at the same time, have a shot at providing affordable housing. And, you know, Jim will, I'm sure, say that there's no such thing as affordable housing, and I would tend to agree with him, because we have, in order to protect the environment, to protect our growth from becoming too large, we've really boxed ourselves in to where we have a very hard time building anything now, and we've added so much cost that it's almost impossible for it to be affordable. And we have these conversations every week. How are we going to start to unlock some of these things, not to have rampant development, but just to be able to get things through the process in a dependable time frame, so that you've got a shot at having an effective, have the ability to provide an affordable home, and that's a big challenge.
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, and I don't know what it's like on Maui because I haven't been there in some time, but I do think that here on Oahu there are a lot of folks who feel like there's too much development, that Kakaako is becoming Hong Kong, and they feel like developers have free reign as opposed to having their hands tied. Of course, that has to do, the kind of development that's happening there has to do with the fact that that's the development that makes money, because there are so many restrictions on, you know, the kind of buildings we can build. But it is an interesting conversation, because if you talk to the average person, I would guess here in, you know, on Oahu, they might not say that they feel like developers are too boxed in. Jim, what do you think?
Well, I completely agree. I think all of the development there in Kakaako and elsewhere, I wonder who is planning to live there. And are these really being built for local people out of local needs? I don't think so. Given the sorts of challenges lying ahead in terms of sea level rise, and in terms of energy challenges, even though we have a glut, and we are thinking in terms of too much oil and so forth, the long run forecast is not good. We have to have some alternative to it. So I think everyone who's in favor of more housing should have to live on the very top floor. So when the lights go out, when the sea level rises, they will have the opportunity of walking up and down the stairs to their house, because that's not, in my opinion, the kind of development we need more of given the future. I think that, for example, in 1970, we had something called Hawaii 2000, when we were looking ahead. And this is when there were still vast tracts of land owned by the estates and the military and the government, when it would be possible to have had massive development. And the ideas of having pockets of high rises and then open land in between, I think is a very good idea. When I moved here, I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment, and I've reared 4 children and 2 wives in that apartment. And I believe that if we had more of a Japanese attitude towards housing and didn't think that we were out in Texas somewhere, we would be able to find housing that would in fact accommodate our people quite well.
Well, and we're seeing more and more micro units popping up all over, some apartments as little as 277 square feet. I know you've probably been covering that as well.
Yes.
This question I actually would love for you to take a stab at. It says, since the outrigger chains and the Pacific Beach hotels have been sold, there are no major locally owned hotels. Can we expect HTA and the tourism industry to be sympathetic to local folks and desires? I mean, the hotel ownership, that change is a very big one.
Absolutely, and I think one of the questions that raises is how much money is staying locally. And when I was talking to folks for this feature, that was one of the big questions that they said, look, this thing needs to be tracked. This is one of the things that we increasingly, we need to increase the number of ways that we're tracking the costs of the visitor industry. And you know, I think that's a good point too, that the line between the a visitor and a resident is blurring. And more than one person that I spoke to for the piece also said that, you know, there's a big gray area, and it's getting even grayer about who is a visitor and how are they using the resources, who is a new resident or a part of the year resident. And increasingly, because air travel is so much easier than it used to be, why not have a house here where there are comparatively low property taxes and visit the house? And are you a resident? Are you not a resident? Another thing that I think we need to do before we get too hung up on visitor numbers is to look at the changes in visitor habits as well, because that's one of the big drivers, and I think it's an even bigger driver than the increase in visitor numbers that we've been seeing. So for this piece, when I was starting out, I thought, well, what's my connection to this topic? And I thought of Laniakea Beach. When I used to go there 20 years ago, there would be 3 or 4 other people there maybe. And it was a really peaceful, sort of reliable place that I could just go. And then the turtles found it, and then the visitors found it, and the tour buses found it. And I went again just as I was beginning this piece, and there were 93 people. That huge, I mean, that's a 3,000% increase instead of the 30% increase that might have been suggested just by we've had 30% more visitors since I was younger. But now, we have 3,000% more people on Laniakea Beach, and the question is why. And a lot of folks that have been looking at the subject say it's social media that has been making the big difference, and it's also millennials and the way that they travel. Millennials don't want to sit on a resort. They don't want to just sit with a Mai Tai by the pool. They want to get out. They want the secret thing. They want the thing that nobody else has, or they want the thing that they saw on Instagram that their friend posted, so they can have that in common. And that's one of the big drivers, I think, of the feeling of overcrowding, because it's I don't think anyone has quantified what overcrowding is, but everyone can feel it. So we feel overcrowded because people are doing things differently.
Right, the tourists aren't just staying in Waikiki anymore.
Exactly, and the new residents, or the part-time residents, are also not staying in Waikiki anymore, and the old-time residents, who are, I don't know, under the age of 40, are, they're getting out on the weekends instead of staying in and, I don't know, watching movies. Although they're also doing that.
Yeah, right. Well, that's a great segue to another slide that we have prepared for you, and that's looking at visitor accommodations and where people are actually staying. So this is reported by Pacific Business News, and it says that about half of tourists are staying in hotels, 13% in timeshares, 15% in vacation rentals, and then of course there is a big question, and then these are the 3 main drivers, and of course that doesn't add up to 100, so there are other bed and breakfasts and what have you, but these are the 3 main places. The thing that's not on here, of course, is the illegal vacation rentals, and that probably goes to your point about people feeling it in their neighborhood, that suddenly there's a strange car down the street that I've never seen before, and all these people coming in and out. How does HTA track those kinds of numbers, and how do we deal with these illegal vacation rentals?
So first of all, I want to clarify that these numbers come from our visitor plan inventory report, which we just published. And we don't actually ask in our visitor plan inventory survey whether you're legal or illegal or what your tax number is or anything like that. So I think that from a public perception, the feeling is that if we've counted you, you must be legal. But that's not necessarily the case. And HTA, we're not in the business of necessarily like trying to tell the county, okay, this person, that we're not doing that. I think it's a really important issue because some people think just because they pay taxes, they're legal, but you need to also comply with land use and other kinds of zoning. So I think that's really important. One of the things that I'm concerned about is safety and security. In the case of a natural disaster, if you're staying at a unit that's out there that I can't identify, I don't know what the address is or anything, how do I, as the HTA, tell you about these things that are coming, because that's part of what HTA's responsibility is too, to care for all of the visitors, not just the ones that are staying at the hotels or the timeshares or the ones that we can identify.
And what's interesting about this, of course, is what's legal and illegal varies county by county, and Maui has been sort of at the forefront of this.
Right, we've got a lot of vacation rentals that are permitted, and we've got way more that are illegal. And the challenge that we have is that we want to have other options for our visitors, but we have a process to go through to make sure that the communities in which somebody wants to open up either a B&B or a vacation rental are receptive, because we don't feel that it's advantageous to put people where they don't want to be, the neighbors don't want them. So we have a permitting process. We are also working towards having the ability to identify on the internet those units that are operating illegally and won't say where they're located or who the owner is. We're about to engage a company to look behind the screen on the internet and identify both the owner and the location so that we can enforce our zoning laws and make sure that we're protecting the level of affordable rentals and the level of affordable housing, because it's taking a huge toll on the availability of both of those. And it's a very significant issue for the neighbor islands. And I'm sure it's a very significant issue here. So to see companies like Airbnb come in and say, well, we would love to sign everyone up for collecting taxes. Well, they've been facilitating people breaking the law for as many years as they've been operating here in Hawaii. And so it's important for us to get a handle on that, because it's the county's jobs to make sure that we're providing a process to approve vacation rentals. And it's got to be a relatively easy one, and we're not there yet. It's a very costly process, but it is a process that allows us to give the community an opportunity to say, hey, we've got enough, we don't want another one here. And Airbnb to me is just not plain fair, because they're not collecting, currently they're not collecting TAT, they're not collecting GET. And if we're missing out on $70 million, as they say, that's their bad, not ours.
Well, and you talked about the millennial visitor and sort of the changing visitor. Jim, I wonder if you want to weigh in on what the future visitor to Hawaii looks like.
I have no idea. Futurists don't know what the future will be. We just suggest that there are a lot of reasons to think that the problems that we've had either will be newly formed. We looked at them from different points of view. I'm just saying that certain things that we have taken for granted recently, which is that there will be enough, that airplanes will be able to fly consistently without a great deal of difficulty. And there are a lot of reasons to wonder whether that's true. It's a big challenge as more and more people want to fly, to find places where those planes can land. And so we are moving to the outer island, to the neighbor islands and elsewhere, and having major airports everywhere. Well, there are also certain corridors that airlines have to follow in. So we're going to have to fly like geese or something like that in order to get there. Also, you may have read that one of the things about climate change is in some parts of the world, it's too hot for airplanes to take off and fly. And we've recently had all sorts of problems with the opposite, with the snow and everything in JFK, really a major problem there from snow and hurricane-like snow that will continue. Global warming means the globe is warming, but climate change means that we can no longer expect the sort of dependable climate. And there are many other things that I could mention. One of the amazing things that has happened over the past 40 or 50 years is incredible changes in communication technology from what we once had to what we have now. And yet we've not had any major breakthroughs in transportation equal to that. The last big breakthrough was the jet plane. And we tried the supersonic, but that didn't work, and they're talking about it again, but neither the economics or the technology are going to make it. So we need a breakthrough in teleportation or something like that in order to be able to do in transportation what we've been able to do in communication. And a lot of the communication means that travel isn't necessary. And so I think in general, within the short amount of time I have, I can't go through all of the things and their interrelations that I hope you guys are looking at, and that I hope the political folks are looking at, in addition to the problems that we have at the present time. So I don't know what they're looking like, but one of them might be a robot. And I think that artificial intelligence, the end of jobs, the movement towards full unemployment, these are real serious problems that we've been talking about for a long time, and now the technology is here. And the reason we've been able to have mass tourism and then mass tourism is also because we had an economy that produced people that had a lot of disposable wealth. Where's that going to come from in the future? Where's it coming from now? We all have to have so many jobs, as you point out. Will Bitcoin solve the problem? Is that the new economy? Or is that just another bubble, which I think it is, and not a major transformation and so forth?
I feel like we could get a few glasses of wine and just talk all night with Jim about this. It's fascinating. Your perspective is so unique. I want to go back.
I wish that weren't the case. I wish everyone would understand that you need to look this way.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, people are getting here in the same way, but they're doing things differently, right? So, Jennifer, when you're with what HTA does, you know, how does that change how you market? And the other thing that, you know, a lot of these questions that we're getting from the audience tonight is basically how much is too much, right? Now we're at 9 million. Next year, do we want to hit 10? Do we want to hit 9.5? I mean, is there a point where we say, okay, let's stop advertising Hawaii?
I don't think the number itself is the issue, because what I think this needs is more study. So in 2001, the Hawaii State Legislature authorized a study on sustainable tourism, and you know, that study took a number of years. It was a coordination between a number of departments. It was led by DBED and with assistance with HTA, but then we looked at each county and each island. But you know, that was quite a while ago, and the world has changed since then. Hawaii has changed, the residents have changed. So, and like we said, the way the tourists are visiting have changed. So I do think that it needs more study to figure out, because I don't think there's a magic number per se. We need to figure out what that balance is.
Well, let's go to some of the quotes we want to pull again from Levon's article, because this was a very sort of interesting piece for us. This is from the director of, let's go to Carl Bonham. Overcrowding is real. There's not much disputing that. If you think about Kailua Town, it's hard to call it a town anymore because how much it has changed. You know, it goes back to your story about Laniakea and this idea that when you go to see a turtle, you're there with way more people than you are with turtles.
Right.
You know, at what point do we say enough?
That's a great question. When you were talking about Kailua, I recalled somebody saying that they lived in Kailua, and Kailua was like a burnt offering upon the altar of the tourism industry.
Wow.
And yeah, and I thought, wow, that was really memorable, and it has changed a lot. But at the same time, everyone I spoke to about this, who was an economist or who had studied the issue, said that there is sort of there's a number that's far beyond the number of tourists that we're getting now, where our island simply can't support anymore. But we're not even close to that number yet. I looked at some other sort of tourist ratio numbers, and Las Vegas has 600,000 people, and they get 43 million tourists a year. We have 1.5 million people in a much larger space, and we get 9 million tourists right now. So there's and in Las Vegas, unlike a lot of other places, very few people are complaining about, or residents are not complaining about the tourism industry, even though the ratio is so much greater towards the tourism industry, because their model still works. They still they have the Strip, and the 43 million tourists visit the Strip, and the residents live elsewhere, and they're not impacted because they're not sharing space in the same way. We are, and the lady from Iceland, Miss Ladottir, right?
I'll let you pronounce it.
I looked at that. Anyway, So at the HTA annual conference, she gave a keynote speech, and she said the interesting thing about the tourism industry is that, unlike other industries, we're competing for resources with this industry. Usually, industry is out of sight, out of mind. You know, you don't live where you mine, you don't live where you fish necessarily, although that does have, you know, we're using the ocean. But you live where tourists want to visit now, especially now that they want to get out into residence space. They want to stay at Airbnbs. They want to stay in real communities, and they want authenticity.
And we have that quote up for the audience just to take a quick look at about this sort of collision course that the visitors and the residents are on. An interesting perspective from the audience tonight, someone writing in, what's wrong with accepting the fact that we are a major city destination too, such as Las Vegas or New York City? Mike? What's wrong with that?
Well, I've lived here my whole life. I've never felt like I'm in New York or any other big city. For me, Oahu is still a reasonably, a reasonably wonderful place to be. And I grew up here, and it's changed, but it's still a wonderful place. So I don't see us being comparable to New York City.
Jim, what do you think about that? About just
Well, you know, I'm really of two
fate?
minds here. On the one hand, we have been able to make what you said become be more or less true by land use laws and things that other states don't have, and in very early times. And we also have a native culture that has a way of life that prefers a certain type of environment that you don't have in Las Vegas anymore. I grew up in Florida, which was nothing but tourism, and those native people are gone. No one to object to that. And so I think we have a very unique, unusual situation for us here that is really precious and worth preserving. At the other hand, my family and myself, when we go on a vacation, we go to Shinjuku. We go to the very most crowded, most polluted, most artificial, but thriving and dynamic place we could possibly go. We love it. We would like to go eating in really grungy places, and we like to, that's our idea of a good vacation. Lying on the beach, surfing, who wants to do that? So I have no objection to a completely artificial world. We are have moved into what is called the Anthropocene epoch, in which humans are now the major geological force on Earth. And we have moved from a garden, from a wilderness to a garden, and now to an iron lung. I don't know, now to something completely artificial and under human creation. So in a sense, you want turtles, we'll give you a plastic turtle. Who cares? We can make a Disneyland out of all of this, as some people have proposed. I don't want that. And I know many people that choose to stay in Hawaii don't want that either. But if you look at the population growth and the fact that people are not about to try to control population, and economic growth not about to slow it down, the only alternative we have is to enjoy the sort of completely artificial world that we are creating, including here.
I think it's also worth noting that a lot of the major city destinations are feeling overwhelmed also. The New York Times a couple of months ago ran an article about how many tourists is too many tourists, and that's New York City. You know, you would think that they would be able to absorb that level, but they feel they can't. Venice and Barcelona, a lot of cities in Southern Europe had protests this year about tourists. So it's not necessarily about an urban environment necessarily. It's just about I think it's about management more than anything else. It's about making smart decisions and figuring out, really asking the right questions. You know, what do we want to be, and how are we going to get there, and how are we going to allocate our resources that are coming in, and make sure that the resources do come in from the visitors that we do get.
I think it's a great time to go to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that HTA completely cares about is protecting our Hawaiian culture, our natural resources, and providing programs for the community, festivals and events and other things. And one of the things that I'm recalling as we're having this conversation is that Dr. Mack from UHERO recently put out a white paper where he was trying to decide whether or not we're in over-tourism yet, and he says we're not. But everybody acknowledges that we're crowded. So it's where are we on that point? Even the economists don't completely, agree as to where that point is.
I wouldn't trust an economist on environmental issues, even Jim Mack. But I think the point is, nonetheless, we can devise an entirely artificial environment that is still pleasing if it's well done.
Well, I wonder, we're getting close to the end here, but Maui, you've worked so hard, and you said that there are so many restrictions on the housing. Have we reached too many tourists? I mean, what's your take on this?
Oh, I don't believe so. Not in the neighbor islands. I think we still have the ability to grow. I don't think there's a desire for us to grow beyond where we are now, but I think we have the capacity. When Levon was mentioning feeling crowded out by visitors, or at least running across visitors all over the place on Oahu. Well, your ratio is 1 to 10. Ours is 25. 25% visitors, not 10% of the population. So it is a pressure, but again, I think we need to figure out how to balance that without allowing it to become too plastic, because we do have a vibrant culture. We do have incredible scenic views that we need to protect. So I think we still have a ways to go, but at the same time, we've got to tread very, very lightly.
Okay, and we're going to leave it there. Thank all of you for joining us tonight. And of course, we thank our guests, Jennifer Chun from the Hawaii Tourism Authority, Jim Jader from the Hawaii Research Center for Future Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Levon Leong, senior writer with Hawaii Business Magazine, and Mike White, chair of the Maui County Council. Next week on Insights, what issues do you think should be at the top of your representative's to-do list for the upcoming legislative session? Could this be one of the most pivotal sessions in recent years, or politics as usual? That's next week. We hope you'll join us. I'm Yunji Denise for Insights on PBS Hawaii. A hui hou.